Turn to John 13 as we start a new series, Living for Something Greater. The Crossroads for every person's life. I mean, you're going to come to this crossroad, and probably you've already faced it, but we want to talk about the crossroad that every one of us are going to face. When we observe the dire need in the world today with issues such as famine, poverty, war, racism, disease, such as AIDS, the AIDS epidemic that's taken place in Africa, which makes individuals see the dilemma the world has experienced, they begin to ask the question, what can I do about it? Sometimes the challenges are so large that a tendency in individuals to say is that my contribution, or will my contribution to the world really change anything at all? I think most of us deal with that. I mean, it's like, what can I do that will really affect the world? All of us have one life to live, and we're going to spend our life on something, and we must understand this reality. Friends, you and I are spending our lives right now. The question is, what are we spending it on? I've always maintained that in each one of us there's a gambler. That should make you smile a little bit, that it's something that I think that God has put in each one of us, that we are attracted towards taking risks. You and I are going to take risks in our life. There are greater and lesser degrees of this risk taking in all of us, but nonetheless, every one of us were designed to be adventurous or to have faith, to step out in areas that we haven't stepped out in before. From what I understand, gambling has become a greater obsession amongst Americans than ever before. With the internet access, my daughter, who works in the reservations for hotels and motels, she told me this the other day, that Las Vegas runs at a 98% occupancy rate year-round now. And that, you see gambling going in almost in every state. It's another source of revenue. And so there's this idea that people are really looking for something to risk their good, hard-earned money on. The motivation behind gambling is to make huge amounts of money without having to work for it. All of us have had that little voice, and don't sit there and bat your eyes at me as though you didn't. I mean, I go by that lottery sign, and every time I see it, there's a little voice, it's your turn. Now, I haven't bought a lottery ticket yet, but I want you to know I have been tempted, because I believe that someday it's going to be my turn. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We'll give you an example. Now, friends, understand this. Las Vegas and the gambling industry puts out these kinds of messages to entice people to gamble. The story I'm going to relate to you is a story that I read about a man that had just lost his job in Las Vegas. And so on his way home, he thought, well, what the heck? I'll stop by a casino and gamble. See what happens. So he goes into a casino, pulls the slot a number of times, and wins $1 million. I'm sure he was singing, "This is the day." If you don't know that song, oh well. But anyway, 2 weeks later from that, he's thinking, my luck was pretty good. Why not do it again? He goes back to the same casino, to the same slot machine, pulls it a few times, and wins $26 million. Now, one of the reasons that Las Vegas will put this kind of story out is to entice you and me, that it could be your turn to make the big bucks, you see. Another guy that I read about that was really down on his luck, so much so that he could only play the penny slots, and this was in Reno. And he puts in $1.50 and wins $1 million. Now here's the motivation that I understand behind gambling, is that you risk it, which there is some kind of an adventurous addiction just to that, just to do it. And then behind that is that possibly I'll have this big payoff. In other words, I'll have a big payoff and I don't have to work, and so therefore my life is pretty much set. And I guess that one of the mindsets of the younger generation that we are raising that are being so addicted to this kind of behavior is simply because they have that idea that someday I'm going to hit it big and therefore I won't have to work. Now, before we all run out and start this adventurous lifestyle, I want to give you some statistics on the odds of you winning a major jackpot. Okay? This illustration comes from Bill Hybels and a friend of his that actually did the math work on it. So if you have problems with it, you write Willow and talk to him. He says the probability of you winning a major jackpot is 121 times greater than being struck by lightning 121 times. That's the way I was supposed to say it. So let's break that out. Here's how it goes. That means this, that if you go out and get struck by lightning 120 times, are we communicating? That on the 120th time, you need to go out and bet because you're going to win. Now, before you do that, I want to tell you a story about a man that holds the record, the world's record, according to Guinness Book of World Records, by being struck by lightning than any other person. 7 times. One time blew his belt or his boot off, welded his zipper shut. I don't know why I bring that up on Saturday night church, but I recognize you people probably can handle it. So, here's a guy that holds the world record, and he's only done it 7 times. You know, so the idea of us winning this thing is just not going to happen. Now, here's the point that I'm trying to make, is that our society will come along and influence us towards an experiment in our life and saying, this will produce happiness in your life. Why don't you risk it? Why don't you bet on this? I remember flying into Moscow, and you have to remember the mindset of a young man born and raised in western Colorado and going through the Cold War era and thinking about Moscow and all the people that were there, that this was our absolute enemy. And now here I am, an adult, flying in, and all these thoughts are running through my mind. And the thought that was running through my mind was this whole idea of communism. And what an experiment it was. Only to realize that millions, friends, millions of people lost their lives due to an idea that somebody rolled the dice and said it was going to work and turned out that it didn't work. And you recognize that there are so many times in life when somebody comes by and they will offer you something and you will think in your mind, this is something that I want to gamble my life on. Now, just to fast forward a few generations from communism, we recognize that it didn't work. But people bet their lives on it. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of tired of hearing myself saying, that was stupid. You know, maybe when you just kind of get to this age, you just go, don't know if I want to risk my life like that anymore. And here's the point. Every one of us are going to come to a crossroads in our life, and we're going to believe a cultural influence or our own influence or what God has said, and He is saying this. I want you to risk laying your life down in the area of servanthood. And find out that there is greater fulfillment in that than whatever your human nature could ever bubble up in you. And I'm going to balance that out in just a minute. Or what society could tell you, and I'm going to balance that out in a minute too. But I want you to understand that He is saying this is where you're going to find fulfillment. Now, Jesus is going to wash the disciples' feet. And I'm going to ask you to do something. This is out of John 13, verses 2 to 16, and actually 17. And I will not read this to you if you will promise me that you will go home and read it. And I won't have you raise your hand so you become a liar, but anyway, I would like for you to do that. Now, the reason why I want to take the time just to kind of illustrate this story to you is because I want you to think about Jesus washing the disciples' feet in the context of the great things that He has done. And in my opinion, this foot washing ceremony, or better put, tradition, was something that was not a big deal compared to all the things that Jesus really did when it comes to great servanthood. I mean, raising Lazarus from the dead, I think, is a lot better than washing 12 guys' feet. You know what I'm saying? Or feeding 5,000 men or 4,000 men and all their kids and all the rest of it. I mean, when you think about the great things that Jesus did in his servant role as a person here on the planet, this is not really a big deal. But why does Jesus take this example to say, this is the kind of person that I want when they say they are going to be my follower, to have this characteristic in them? Because I think here's the point. It's not, now get a hold of this, it is not the size of the endeavor that God is impressed with. Whatever it might be. That's why an act of kindness, whatever it is. God's not impressed with that. What he is impressed with is the size of the heart. All of us know when somebody has their heart in something. And all of us know when someone doesn't have their heart in something. That's just a shell that's going on. Jesus is saying this, through this, taking this towel and this water basin and washing the disciples' feet. He is saying this, guys, I want you to do this with the right heart. Because whatever you do with the right heart is going to translate into the people that you are serving, that there is something different about how you serve them rather than just a job description and doing it. You do it because you recognize this is what God has created us to do. So I want to talk to you tonight, if you have your little outlines, about 5 challenges to a life of servanthood. 5 challenges to a life of servanthood. Number 1 is this: acknowledge the hesitation factor. Acknowledge the hesitation factor. When we come to a crossroads in our life or decision we must make, there is a natural pause or hesitation. I want you to stop and think about this for a minute. And it doesn't matter the size of the decision. Of course, greater the decision, greater the pause, greater the hesitation, because there's more consequences or rewards involved. And so there's a hesitation that's really built in to this whole thing. So there's this kind of thing that goes on when we are presented with, an opportunity to serve, an opportunity in our lives to do something different. We come to a place that there's a hesitation, and that hesitation is basically based on this: should I or shouldn't I? And it's natural. It's right. As a matter of fact, when Jesus is at this point and he knows that the dinner is going to be served, he already knows what he's going to do. But understand this, friends, the reason why he knows what he's going to do, that he's going to get up and wash the disciples' feet, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, is simply because he had decided many years ago that that's what his life was going to be about. You see? So when it comes to this particular time, every one of us are going to have a hesitation when something pops up in our life. Should I do it or shouldn't I do it? Now I want to give you 3 factors, and I really want you to think about this hesitation factor, because that's really what I'm zoning in to say. This is natural. That when an opportunity comes by, you're going to hesitate, and it's okay. And that you're supposed to hesitate and think about it. Let me tell you what these 3 factors are. Number 1 is this: it's natural. Because you and I are human. That when things come up, and let me just tell you this, there are things that will come up and opportunities that will come up in your life that you know that your giftedness and your humanness will not function well in that particular arena. For instance, I thank God every time I go into the hospital for people that are accustomed and even have a calling to working in the medical field. Friends, I do not function well there. Most of the time I'm praying, God, don't let me faint. That is really tough for a Western Slope RR guy to admit that he has trouble with keeping his head on when he walks into the hospital, but it's the truth. So there's something that comes up in me when there's an opportunity to serve in the medical field that I just go, I don't think so. And I think it's a wise choice. I didn't wire myself that way. I don't go in the hospital and think, well, I'll faint. I just do it. It comes naturally. Okay? The second one is this. Our influence from the society that you and I live in. That produces in us hesitation as to whether we're going to do something, because it is an opportunity to do something else that our society is barking in our ears. Now, friends, let me balance this out. Every one of us have some form of recreation or entertainment in our life that probably has been generated by our society that is amoral, and actually God gets kind of a grin on his face when you participate in it. Now, why is that? Is it wrong? I think it's amoral. You know, I'd hate to think that motorcycle riding is a sin. Then I know where I'm headed. A few other guys in here do too. See, it's an amoral thing. It is not a wrong thing. And then the third factor is this. So there's this hesitation factor. Well, am I going to enjoy myself, or am I going to do what I feel like God's telling me to do? And then there's the third factor, and that's this. And this whole hesitation thing, it's what God is saying to me. And friends, the reason I put it in that order, natural, and then the culture, and then God speaking to us, is because I think that that's the way that it really works. I wished it was the other way, but I don't think that that's the way that it works. And here's the point that I really want to drill home. Not every opportunity that you have that comes to you about serving are you supposed to take. Thus, we have the hesitation factor for you to really discern, is this the place, God, you want me to serve? You understand that? Now, let me guarantee you this, friends. If you bat 100% of the time that every time an opportunity comes up and you don't participate, something's wrong. Something's wrong. So understand this hesitation factor, that it really is something that God has built into us so that we find our sweet spot, and there's nothing wrong with that, okay? Number 2 is this. Beware of the self-importance issue. Now, this is going to take just a minute to really develop. Friends, I want you to know that amongst the 12, there was a clique that was beginning to form. And it is very biblical to talk about this. There was a hierarchy that was beginning to take place amongst the 12. And that was Peter, James, and John. And you can read about this in Matthew chapter 20. That the mothers of Zebedee came because they noticed this little difference that was going on here. And she says, excuse me, but I would like to know if my sons could sit at your right hand and your left hand, because I see you've got a good thing going on here, and I don't want them to miss out on the higher echelons of your organization. And here's what happens, is as these three begin to distance themselves, because Jesus actually invites them into this inner circle, that the other 10 kind of begin to wonder, well, I wonder when it's going to be our turn. Now, take this in context. Jesus is now going to have this dinner, the Last Supper, and he's going to wash the disciples' feet. Now, understand that tradition was that when the guests came in, the host would wash the guests' feet. And the reason why they would do that was because obviously in those days they wore sandals and their feet got very dusty. And so when they reclined at table, and you read that in the scriptures, when they reclined at table meant that your feet were going to be in the face of one of the other people's guests, or in the face of another guest. Which meant that it would probably smell and be unsanitary, so it was wise to wash people's feet. So, here's the moment of impact that's going to go on. Because now there's a hierarchy that's going on, that when it came to this moment, all the disciples knew somebody had to wash the disciples or all the other people's feet. And I think what was going on is Peter, James, and John were going, not me, man. I made it into the inner circle. And I think that there's a moment that even the scriptures does not describe, of real